What key lesson have you learned about engaging users in the design or delivery of eHealth tools for mental well-being?
Thank you. So, can you hear me? Yeah. So I'm Mel Mckendrick. I'm an associate professor in psychology at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, working on the SMILE project, which is still running until October 26. And it's developing a cognitive behavioural therapy designed inspired digital game to build resilience in adolescents and young people from age 10 to 24. The main thing that I want to focus on here is looking at the sustainable engagement and the steps required to achieve this. So the first lesson that we learned, as Sarah had mentioned, is the importance of involving end users early on and continuously. We ran a series of focus groups in the beginning to engage users and stakeholders, and this gave us some insight into the issues that young people worry about and their attitudes to digital mental wellbeing tools. However, we came to realise that we actually needed a deeper co-design approach to be able to achieve lasting engagement. We put more recently then together a public involvement group, and we did that as part of a voluntary research assistance scheme at our university so that we could involve students. They've been testing the game continuously so that they're really heavily involved with its evolution, and that means that we can gain a much deeper sense of understanding of what motivates end users. And for them, we involve them in all our research meetings and, show them the research process so that there's a real tangible benefit to them. But the project has shown us how difficult meaningful public engagement can be and the recruitment difficulties that can impact on the integration of feedback within the time frame. So it's really important to think outside the box and forge connections with people who can help. And we've recently been engaging with youth panels and science events, science festivals, for example, to ensure diversity of user engagement. And we're lucky that we're working across 7 countries and across schools and universities and community groups to help that diversity that's so important in actually sustaining the engagement over time. We know that users are also more likely to engage with eHealth tools when they feel that their data is secure and used ethically. So it's really important. We've tried to be very transparent about the data collection, the usage, the security, as Leor had mentioned, and how it's stored is really important, and how this is transmitted to the end users, so the young people, for example, in a way that they can actually understand. So having that transparency is really important. Also having the importance of having easy to navigate reliable digital tools, as Claire mentioned. So to achieve this, we've had dedicated substantial usability testing sessions, which were led by our partners Interest in Spain. And this has been able to help us to understand where there's technical issues or scripting elements that just don't make sense to the user that would halt engagement later on. So it's really important to not underestimate the importance of this stage of the time required to implement it. And lastly is the accessibility of equipment, I would say. So young people, for example, might not have their own phones if they're under a certain age. In other projects where we've been designing for older people, we found that they maybe didn't have access to laptops, for example. So understanding this from the very early design stage is really crucial. I think I'm probably out of time now, so I'll hand back.
What gaps have you encountered, technical or other, that slowed or blocked implementation?
Yeah, I think our experiences, because we're still at the point that we're at in the project, are probably earlier than the later implementation stage, but it's so important to get things right at that early point. So I think one of the biggest challenges has been communication in terms of across different disciplines, and and I've found this in other projects as well, that differences even within clinical teams where you have different ways of doing things, you come from a different background, or differences between clinical and technical teams where you have even one word can mean different things across different contexts. So it can take a long time just to get to grips with this, and it can result in misunderstandings which can slow progress. So there needs to be time, I think, at the beginning of projects built in early on to be able to just build relationships and creative dialogues that people can understand each other, which will then smooth that later implementation aspect. I think having goals that people have different ideas of what their goals are, so having a shared understanding of the goals, both in the terms of the project and then after, at the end of that project cycle going forward, is really important. So again, you need a shared framework, and somebody to manage that process is really important and mitigate when there are any issues. There can be, problems of dynamics, personality dynamics within teams that can halt progress. And again, going forward, that take up, it's really important to create a good dynamic so that after the project finishes, you want to then work together, continue to work together towards that implementation as well. And that can mean different priorities sometimes with commercial and academic partners. I understand that very well because I'm an academic who's also got a company outside of that. So that can create a lot of different types of priorities and timescales. And the lack of, this is something I know that Leo had mentioned, lack of interoperability, where digital systems, might be moving at different speeds, the integration, and how that happens, that needs to be planned really early on. And also just issues like, for example, data storage and where the location of that, considering GDPR and all of these kind of things. Again, I think it echoes what I was saying earlier about the very early planning and taking enough time before getting into the deep parts of the project just to iron out and make sure these parts are correct, because it will impact the later development.
Interventions balance the benefits of mobile phone intervention engagement with the pot risks of phone ad, and what strategies can be employed to mitigate these risks.
So I think that the intervention has to be designed right from the beginning so that it's for short-term basis, and a lot of times so that it's used as a training tool in a sense. So some of the work I'm involved in is for social anxiety, for example. So rather than aiming to keep people within the digital system, help them to develop tools themselves, psychological tools that they can then take out in the community and give them exercises to do that, so that part of what they're doing is a transitional process with the aim of helping them to put this into practice in real life where they're no longer using the digital tool.
Do you have any views on inclusion in these low-resource regions and settings?
Yeah, I think on the other hand of that, there are cases where in countries that maybe don't have the same access, there is a problem of access, but maybe it's about being creative of having places where people can go to access the help. But also there are countries and cultures that are more stigmatized, for example, that don't want to have face-to-face because that has a higher cost for them, or they may be traumatized and are not able to yet. So we're working with that. We were working with a project in Ukraine, for example, with children, and they weren't, at a stage where they felt comfortable talking to psychologists, for example. So it's trying to address some of that through digital help, in a sense. So I think there's as many opportunities as there are barriers to help people through digital mental health.